Thanks, Jenna. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of our Foundational Reading Skills webinar series. If you missed part 1, no worries. I'll go over that information briefly today, and that video is available on our website and on our YouTube channel. So today we're going to continue talking about the foundational skills that every student needs to master in order to become a proficient reader. We know that we plan our instruction by following our standards. And those standards tell us what our students need to be able to do by the end of each grade, but they don't tell us specifically how we should teach those skills. Remember, part 1 of the webinar focused on print concepts and phonological awareness. And today we'll be talking about the standards and research that kind of guide our instruction in phonics and word recognition and fluency. So here's our agenda for today. You should have the handout. The link is in the chat. And that handout has the slides on it, and it also has some takeaways at the end, which are printable, reproducible tools that might be helpful for you as you plan your instruction. We know that our instruction is based on standards and research, and I'll be talking about specific standards and research studies that relate to foundational reading skills as I talk through the webinar. So the introduction to the Common Core state standards reminds us that the focus of the standards is on results for our students rather than the means of getting there. So those standards tell us what to teach, but not how. And that leaves us free to use our professional judgment and our experience to identify the tools and the knowledge that are most helpful for meeting those goals. In this webinar, I'm going to review some key research findings about reading development and also revisit some predictors of reading success. We need to keep in mind the critical content and most effective strategies for teaching reading, and then use that knowledge to plan and prioritize our instruction to get the very best results for our students that we possibly can. So let's take a closer look at the foundational reading skills. There are 4 foundational reading skills that are the building blocks for literacy development. We have print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. And today we're focusing on phonics and word recognition and fluency. Remember, the foundational skills aren't an end in and of themselves, but they're necessary and important components of a comprehensive reading program. Because if we want to develop readers who can understand texts across a range of types and disciplines, they need to have a solid foundation in these basic skills. So first, let's take a look at phonics and word recognition. When our beginning readers are starting to learn the relationship between specific sounds or phonemes and the letter or letters that represent those sounds, called graphemes, they're learning phonics. Last time we talked about phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, which is a subset of that. We know that phonemic awareness and phonics aren't the same, but instruction in those 2 areas does overlap. And many researchers, including Brady and Curto, have found that phoneme awareness should be linked with letter sound knowledge for our beginning readers. Next, word recognition is the ability to read words with automaticity, quickly and effortlessly. When a student is accurate and automatic at reading individual words, their reading is naturally going to be more fluent, and their overall reading comprehension is also going to improve because they're using that mental energy to make meaning out of text rather than decoding each word. Word recognition involves 2 types of words. We have regular words, which are words that students can decode by sounding them out, and then irregular words, which cannot be completely decoded by sounding them out. And there are examples here on the slide for you. In the beginning stages of phonics instruction, an irregular word can also be a word that the student doesn't yet have the specific phonics skills to read. Here's an example. Before a student learns that together the letters K and N say n, The words new and no are irregular words. But once they've been taught that K and N together say n, those words aren't irregular anymore. And that's assuming that they've also been taught the vowel patterns EW and OW. So new and no now become decodable words for that student. The research behind how we learn to read is fascinating. We know from that research and imaging that different parts of the brain are active based on whether a word has regular or irregular spelling patterns. So when we talk about phonics and word recognition, we're going to label those two types of words. We'll call regular words that can be decoded sound out words, and irregular words that have to be learned by memory, we'll call those spell out words. And the research has implications for how we teach different types of words. Because our brains learn and process those sound out words and spell out words differently, they should also be taught differently. So here's what the standards tell us about the big picture for phonics and word recognition for sound out words or decodable words. We want our kindergarten all the way up through 5th grade students to be able to know and apply grade level phonics and word analysis skills in decoding words. And the research bears that out for us. What percentage of words do you think are decodable in English? It may be more than you think. About 50% of English words have regular spelling patterns. That means that each sound in a word matches the letter or letters that represent that sound, like these examples: black, hot, and plain. Then another 37% of English words, they just have one error if you're trying to spell them by matching each sound to the letter or letters that represent that sound. And usually that error happens when you're trying to spell a vowel sound. Here's an example: the word temperature. Even though most of that word is decodable, the vowel in the 3rd syllable in temperature has to be learned. We know that all vowels can make the schwa sound, and you can almost read or spell the word temperature just by sounding it out if you're just learning to read. But a student needs to learn that that schwa sound in temperature is made by the vowel A. Research clearly shows the value of systematic explicit phonics instruction, which makes a lot of sense when you recognize that 50% of English words are decodable and another 37% are very close. So the remaining 13% of words in English need to be taught as irregular words, like ocean. Another important part of learning to read is learning high frequency words. So here's what the standards tell us about high frequency words. Students need to be able to read common high frequency words and then be able to spell them as they get older. And the research bears that out. Think about this. 8 words in English account for 18% of all written material, and so on, all the way up to 300 words that account for 65% of English words in writing and reading. So there's a big payoff of teaching those high frequency words to our students, because it's really going to help them when they're reading and spelling words. Here's another takeaway. This can help you with prioritizing your instruction in teaching high frequency words. And there's a full page copy of this at the end of the handout. There are a lot of lists out there of high frequency words, and we've organized this one into helpful categories for you. So the column on the left-hand side of the page lists the high frequency words that have irregular spelling patterns in their order of frequency. These words are permanently irregular, and they need to be taught as spell out words. And we'll look at how to do that in just a minute. The columns on the right-hand side of the page show high frequency words with regular spelling patterns, and they're organized by their vowel spellings. These words need to be taught as sound out words, whether you're doing a phonics lesson or a spelling lesson that features the corresponding spelling pattern. So think for a minute about your current curriculum. Since we know that high frequency words make up a large percentage of the words that students use in reading and writing, it makes a lot of sense that learning to read and spell these words is a high priority. Here's an example of a phonics lesson that it also incorporates phonemic awareness. It's for beginning readers, and the strategies in this lesson are research-based. So at the beginning of the lesson, the teacher's going to say, today we're going to learn about the digraph TH. The sound of TH can either be voiced or unvoiced. Listen while I say each sound of TH. Now you say those sounds with me. Ready? Now, eyes on me. Listen to each word that I say. If you hear the or sound in the word, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If not, give me a thumbs down. Listen, those. Do you hear or in those? So they'd give me a thumbs up because they do hear the sound at the beginning of those. Later on in the lesson, after we've practiced blending and segmenting words with that featured pattern, I'm going to show the students this page with letters and sets of letters. Listen as I read the teacher script. Look at these letters. These letters are the consonants T and H. When T is followed by H, the consonants form a digraph. The digraph TH can say or what sounds? So the students would repeat those sounds. Then I'd go on in the rest of the lesson to say the other sounds that are represented by the letter and letter combinations on the screen. And the students will repeat those sounds with me. The next step in the lesson is to read words in isolation that are going to appear in the story at the end of the lesson. Notice the words in red, those are high frequency words. So this lesson applies that brain research I talked about earlier to teach sound out words and spell out words differently. The words in black font are sound out words, thin and picking. I'll guide my students to sound those words out. And then the words in red font are spell out words. The students will learn these words using a read the word, spell the word, read the word again routine for learning those words by memory. And we'll look at that routine right now. This is a systematic strategy for teaching students how to learn to spell words with irregular spelling patterns. It's based on the brain research we looked at earlier, and it supports word-specific memory. Read the word, spell the word, read the word again. So normally a teacher would present the word using a whiteboard, using an I do, we do, you do model. I would drag my finger under the word when I read it, point to each letter when I'm spelling the word, and then move my finger under the word again. I'll use arrows on the slide and show you how it works. Ready? My turn. Just listen. Out. O-U-T, out. Now you do it with me. Ready? Out. O-U-T, out. Now you do it. Ready? Out. O-U-T, out. So that example and the other examples I've shown you already come from our GATE Plus program. It's a phonics and fluency program for beginning readers that can be taught in small groups or in whole class instruction. Let's look at what else the research tells us about phonics and word recognition. We know that most phonics programs teach students to decode accurately, but just because they can decode accurately doesn't mean that they're going to be able to decode words automatically. And we know that in order to become fluent readers, students need to be able to decode unknown words accurately and automatically. Because if they're using all that mental energy to sound out words, they're not focusing on comprehension. In fact, research shows that students who haven't developed automaticity by the beginning of second grade in reading single words, they're at risk for reading failure. And we know that our classrooms are full of students that are struggling to read. Here's an example lesson that uses a strategy to build automaticity in decoding words in isolation. Look at the words going down the columns. They're organized in word families or grouped together because of a similar pattern to support students as they're learning those patterns. Then, when you look across the rows, a student needs to really carefully examine each word when they're moving from column to column, and that's more challenging for them. So here's how the strategy works. The student starts by listening to and reading along with a narrator as they read the words going down the columns and then across each row. Then the student reads quietly aloud on their own for 1 minute. They're going to read down the columns and then across the rows. They'll click on any words that they can't read quickly and go on to hear it. And then when the timer sounds, they'll click on the last word they read until they meet their words per minute goal. Another big milestone in phonics and word recognition is that by the middle grades, by 3rd to 5th grade, we want our students to be able to decode multisyllabic words. Most of the words students in these grades encounter have 7 or more letters and 2 or more syllables. So here's what the standards tell us about decoding multisyllabic words. And here's what the research tells us. We know that students can be taught to chunk multisyllabic words into spelling units that can be decoded. And we know that once they can accurately decode single syllable words and pronounce all the typical vowel combinations, there are 2 more skills that they need to have in order to successfully decode multisyllabic words. They need to be able to pronounce prefixes and suffixes in isolation and decode open and closed syllables. Here's what the research says about affixes. First of all, we know that 80% of words have at least one prefix or suffix. So if our students already know how to read those prefixes and suffixes, they can quickly recognize them as parts of these multisyllabic words. We also know there are a limited number of affixes, and they occur frequently, so it's worth teaching them to our students in isolation. Here's a table that has a list of the most common prefixes and suffixes with an example word for each one. This can be really helpful when you're working with your older students in decoding those multisyllabic words. And this takeaway is at the end of your handout. Here's an example lesson that helps our students build automaticity reading multisyllabic words. So it begins with a lesson that presents specific suffixes. The student will read along with the narrator and learn to pronounce those suffixes in isolation. Then when they click on a chalkboard, they'll see flashcards that come up and learn to practice and read those suffixes in isolation, and then read multisyllabic words the way we really say it. So they click on a chalkboard and the audio narrator is going to pronounce each syllable of the word and then the whole word. Think about this for a minute. We talked in the first part of the webinar about how it's an advantage for students to develop those foundational skills quickly because they've had more exposure to vocabulary, background knowledge, and the language of books, and that will give them an advantage when they come to reading multisyllabic words. They'll be able to self-correct words when they're trying to read them because they're words the student has already heard before. And then when they get close to the right pronunciation, they'll be able to recognize and pronounce the word correctly. Here's another lesson that builds automaticity with multisyllabic words. So again, they're going to read along with the audio narrator as they pronounce each syllable in the word and then the whole word, starting going down the columns and then across the rows. So the narrator would say, mistrustful, basket, full. basketful, and the student would be reading along with them. Then, after they've listened to the narrator and read along, they'll practice the words independently, still with the option to click on any word they don't know and need to have it pronounced again. Once again, when they meet their words per minute goal, they'll move on to the next step, which is reading the word list for the teacher. The other key skill that we talked about for decoding multisyllabic words is the ability to pronounce open and closed syllables in isolation. Open and closed syllables make up almost 75% of the syllables in English words. So if a student can automatically read those syllables accurately, they'll be much more able to read multisyllabic words. So the sample words here on the slide have open and closed syllables. We'll teach our students that a vowel at the end of a syllable says its long sound, like low and K in relocation, and he in the word adhesive. They'll also be taught that a vowel that's not at the end of a syllable says its short sound, like pan in the word expansionism. So if a student has learned to read their prefixes and suffixes, like re and shun in relocation, and if they can quickly and accurately pronounce the open and closed syllables in isolation, then they'll be able to put all that together and decode these words successfully. Here are some more takeaways that you can use to create lessons to build automaticity with words from your current curriculum. Choose some words that you want your students to practice from a phonics lesson or a spelling lesson or a high frequency word list. And then put the words in columns based on a common feature or pattern. And you could use the last column for irregular spell out words. Here's a graph that the students can use to record their baseline score in blue before they practice, and then the hot score in red after they practice reading the list of words. And then here's another form for you. It's got spaces for flashcards at the top for learning to read prefixes, suffixes, or open and closed syllables in isolation before they practice those multisyllabic words. So those multisyllabic word lessons come from our Word Warm-Ups Live program, which is an online phonics intervention that's part of our Read Live platform. Now let's talk about fluency. We know that fluency is not speed reading. A lot of our students, when we say, I want you to read this passage fluently, will try and rip through it as fast as they can. But we know that fluent readers read with an appropriate speed. They're accurate and they read with proper expression. Our non-fluent readers are going to struggle in at least one of those parts of reading. They might make a lot of mistakes or read very slowly, and they don't read with appropriate expression and phrasing. For many years, educators have recognized that fluency is an important part of reading, and researchers agreed. Over 30 years of research indicates that fluency is one of the critical building blocks of reading, and it's directly correlated to comprehension. Think about our two readers here. In 10 minutes of independent reading, a proficient reader could read about 2,000 words, whereas an at-risk student or a student who's struggling might only read 500 words. So they're spending equal time reading, but they're not getting the same amount of practice. And that disparity is going to play out over the course of a year. So our struggling reader is going to fall further and further behind. Here's what the standards tell us about fluency. We want our young students, our kindergartners, to read with purpose and understanding. And then older students need to read to support their comprehension. And the research bears that out. Fluency is highly correlated with reading comprehension. And we know as practitioners that students become fluent by reading more. So what's the solution? How do we get our students to be more fluent? Is it just a matter of scheduling more time for them to read independently? Well, when I was teaching fourth grade, my at-risk students weren't actually reading a lot of the time. They might have a book in front of them that looked like everybody else's book, but they weren't really reading. and they might have a hard time finding an appropriate level of book to read. And the National Reading Panel in 2000 found that just encouraging our at-risk readers to read independently isn't going to improve their achievement. So how do we fix this? How do we teach our students to read more fluently? Here's some research. We have 3 strategies in the Read Naturally strategy that we put together to help our students read more fluently. The first part of the strategy is teacher modeling. This is where a proficient reader models correct pronunciation and expression. And there are lots of different types of teacher modeling. A student can even read along with an audio recording. The second strategy that has been found to improve reading fluency is repeated reading. This is when a student reads a short story or passage many times until they read it fluently. And then our third strategy is progress monitoring. We want to motivate our students to continue reading, and we do this through giving them feedback on their progress and letting them see their progress over time. So here's a lesson that combines those 3 strategies and helps our students improve their fluency and their comprehension. We're going to start out emphasizing comprehension. We're going to talk with our students about making a prediction about this story. It prepares them to read the story and reminds them that they're reading to learn something. So together, the teacher and the students will decide on a prediction, incorporating the picture, the title, and the key words to help them. The teacher writes the prediction sentence that the group agreed upon. And then the next step incorporates progress monitoring. Students are going to do a cold reading of the story while the teacher times them for 1 minute. They'll underline words they don't know as they read, and this sets the baseline for measuring their improvement. Then they'll record and graph their individual cold timing scores in blue on their graphs. With that visual representation, they'll be able to see their progress as they go and notice that they're actually making improvement. So next is the read along step. Students are going to keep working on their fluency and read the story along with the teacher. This is the teacher modeling component of the strategy. It's going to help our students learn new words, confirm difficult words, and master high frequency words. And the teacher, the whole time she's reading with them, is modeling appropriate phrasing and expression. She's also going to read slowly enough so that the students can actually read along and stop to decode words that have the featured sound for the lesson. So they'll do this several times until the students are ready to do some independent practice. And this is the repeated reading component of the strategy. Students are going to practice independently for 1 minute to improve their fluency and master the story. The teacher is going to time the small group and listen to 1 student each time until she's listened to each student read for 1 minute and records each of their scores. And then they're going to continue practicing until they reach their words correct per minute goal. And again, they'll mark their graph in red to record their final timing score. And this gives them, again, motivation and opportunity to see their progress. Next, of course, we're looking for good comprehension. We want them to understand what they have read. So they're going to complete some sentences about the story and then write a sentence telling what the story is about. We want them to remember what they've read and that they need to read for meaning. This part of the lesson also supports phonics development because they're writing words with the featured phonics pattern. Next is the sentences activity. They're going to apply their decoding skills by reading sentences with words made from the letters and sounds they've been taught in this lesson and their previous lessons. So it's a bit of a review every time. The teacher will read the sentences, the first couple of sentences with the students, and then the students will read independently and mark the featured phonics patterns. Then the spell out words activity, where students are going to practice writing words from the story and develop their phonemic awareness and spelling skills. So they'll use that same strategy, read, spell, read the spell out words as they write the letters on the lines. And finally, the sound out words activity. The teacher is going to dictate some sound out words, and the student will practice their encoding skills, which are so important in their student booklets. Remember, developing phonics, word recognition, and spelling skills, that all helps our students improve automaticity and accuracy in decoding, which leads to improved fluency and comprehension. So let me go back. These examples come from our GATE Plus program, which again is a small group or whole group direct instruction program for building fluency and phonics skills and comprehension. We also have other print-based programs that incorporate the strategy of teacher modeling, repeated reading, and progress monitoring. And there's also an online platform called Read Live. If you have an interest in exploring that, we do offer a free 60-day trial, and you can access that through our website. So I hope you've enjoyed both parts of this webinar on foundational reading skills, and that you've learned something that you can take back and use right away in your classroom. Remember, each of these foundational reading skills is a building block, and it's important to know the research behind why we teach these skills. You're adding to your tools and knowledge as you plan instruction to meet those standards. So keep these practices in mind and try some of the strategies and takeaways we've talked about to get better results with your curriculum for your students. And again, check out our website. There's a lot of information there about teaching and about our programs specifically. Any questions, Jenna?
It does not look like there are any questions. No.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your time today. And please reach out if you have any questions.
Yes, thanks everybody. Just a reminder that we will be sending out follow-up emails with links to the webinar recording and the handout in about 24 hours. Please feel free to share that recording with your colleagues. Please also respond to the survey questions that will appear on your screen after the webinar so we can continue to improve the educational experience for all of you and our future webinars. And please follow us on your favorite social media platform. Thanks and have a great day.